Oh, thank you for being here to all of you, and thanks to the organizing committee for having me. It's a great honor to be here among you, and it's even a greater pleasure, which is not insubstantial, given the title of my talk. Can I have my slides? Oh, here they are. Of course, we are part of the Feyerabend Centennial, and yes, the title of my talk, Feyerabend Critical Hedonism, Funarchism. So my talk is complementary to what Emmanuel Mololo did. So I will try to bring Feyerabend's thought to its backbone, and I will let him speak. So we will see many quotations. My talk is divided in 4 parts. First, we will have a brief summary about an overview of Feyerabend's intellectual trajectory, its phases and the problems that it was facing. Then I will consider the first phase, theoretical pluralism, to be a good empiricist. Second phase, against method and the tyranny of truth. And finally, pleasure in a free society. So Feyerabend's intellectual trajectory is usually divided into 2 sections, 2 main phases. The first one about a methodological project, normative methodological project in order to improve scientific method. How can science be made better, methodologically speaking? This is what his theoretical pluralism aimed to. But then he had a second phase, epistemological anarchism, in which he put into question the very normative methodological project, and he took a very radical position against the method. It's an anti-methodological perspective. There is no scientific method. And this has very far-reaching consequences in terms of the impact and the role of science in society. We will see it. Some people say, well, in the last phase of his production output, philosophical output, Feyerabend took a milder and smoother down some of the corners and the excesses of his radical position, and so we can distinguish a later Feyerabend. My idea here is to give fil rouge, as Emmanuel said before, which tries to see how there is a line throughout Feyerabend's philosophical trajectory. I need to mention what is usually said, that in Nature in 1987, Feyerabend was portrayed as the Salvador Dali of academic philosophy, and currently the worst enemy of science, of course. Yeah, so I'm giving here you the correct quotation. Sometimes it's attributed to Scientific American, sometimes to Science. It's Nature in 1987. So that's the way in which he came to be perceived at the peak of his intellectual career. So what's the fil rouge? I guess that it's his anti-authoritarianism. And this is not a surprise if we consider that in his early days, Feyerabend was raised in the Nazi Austria, that he was exposed to Nazi propaganda, that he was drafted in the Wehrmacht when he was 17, and this implied performing actions that most likely he regretted to have made later in his life. So, this is something, I guess, with which he struggled for all his life, and on very different, on the theoretical point of view and also on the personal point of view. We'll see that later. So let's see his initial project. There's a letter here. Well, it's not a letter, it's a note written on August 1963, which is displayed here, I guess, for the first time, in which he tries to summarize what was the main topic of his research during the last 10 years, so 1953-63. And he says, it has been the history of empiricism, and I have obtained certain tentative results. First, empiricism has a good deal in common with authoritarian forms of knowledge, which are based either upon some basic text or upon the dictum of a personal authority. So empiricism is equated to an authoritarian form of knowledge. And then he says, research which emphasizes the need for an empirical foundation of knowledge is liable to lend to the establishment of a dogmatic system of thought. So, and this is quite, could be considered quite strange as a point of view of someone who is trying to improve the method of science. But what is it trying to mean? Well, there's some. I'm displaying here some of the titles of his output of this phase. How to be a good empiricist. Well, the one was not displayed correctly is problems of empiricism. Empiricism has problems. And we can be good empiricists, though. And how can we be good empiricists? Being tolerant in matters epistemological and having a pluralistic theory of knowledge and action. So, what's the backbone of the argument here? Well, the problem is what he calls theoretical monism, the idea that when we test a theory, scientific theory, empirical facts are the ultimate judge, and they are autonomous from the theory. So the problem is that, well, I said the tyranny of facts. So the very idea that facts are the ultimate judge, that they are autonomous, it's problematic. It's problematic. Why that? Well, you see here what Feyerabend says. Facts and theories are much more intimately connected than is admitted by the autonomy principle, the principle that facts are completely autonomous from theories. Not only is the description of every single fact dependent on some theory, but there are also exist facts that cannot be unearthed except with the help of alternatives to the theory to be tested, and that become unavailable as soon as such alternatives are excluded. There are corners from our perspective we cannot see what comes from the back face of what we are looking at. We need someone else to tell us what's on the other side. So, well, there are some problems in displaying the slides, but still, this is the alternative that he is proposing. So having alternative scientific theories which unearth empirical facts which are not available to a different theory, and we need them in order to, we need this different point of view with this different perspective in order to see what is, what to us is, which is unavailable to us and we are blind to. So his idea was that this situation suggests a theoretical pluralism, the idea of having multiple theories competing at the same time as the basis of every test procedure in scientific knowledge. So this is the way in which we can be good empiricists. So he says, I will make an attempt to formulate a methodology that requires a theoretical pluralism instead of the theoretical monism that is the idea of much of contemporary empiricism, of philosophy in general. Theoretical pluralism is assumed to be an essential, not a temporary feature, but an essential feature for all knowledge that claims to be objective. So we cannot be objective unless we take into consideration different points of view. What is the function of these alternatives? The concrete alternatives provide means of criticizing the accepted theory in a manner that goes beyond the criticism provided by a comparison of that theory with the facts. So this is the tyranny of the facts, the idea that they can be autonomous from theories. Here we have the theoretical pluralism done. Now, this seems to make sense, but there are some technical issues in this point of view, and as Feyerabend, well, there are, logically speaking, it's not entirely clear how this works, even though it's intuitively very interesting and insightful. When we try to figure out the details, well, we run into troubles. But as he was trying to solve these problems, he had an epiphany. Feyerabend had a sort of epiphany looking at the history of science. that maybe the whole normative methodological project was biased and was doomed, basically. Because if we look at the history of science, and that's what he tried to do in detail, we looking for some universal rule that can be considered as central to the scientific method. We are surprised. We get surprised. Against Method and the Tyranny of Truth. So these are the books in which Feyerabend displayed the results of the second part of his intellectual trajectory. The main one, Emmanuel Mololo mentioned many of them. I'm just trying to shrink them down to the essentials. And I'm trying to focus on the political consequences of the outcomes of Feyerabend's theoretical reflection in order to promote a larger reflection on the impact that Feyerabend's thought can have in the reconstruction of the High-Atlas. So what's the point here? This is the basic understanding of the role of science in society. Just because science has a scientific method leading to truth, it's an autonomous part of the society. It has a social function, and it's also its success, its technological success, gives it authority. Okay, so the idea is that of the social autonomy and authority of science based on the success of science, which is based in turn on the scientific method, which is supposedly conducive or aiming at truth in one way or another. The problem here is that of the tyranny of truth, or the tyranny of science through the scientific method and its connection to truth. So what's the problem here? Well, first problem with scientific method. Feyerabend says the idea of a fixed method or of a fixed theory of rationality rests on too naive a view of man. To those who look at the rich material provided by history, it will become clear that there is only one principle that can be defended under all circumstances and in all stages of human development. It is the principle anything goes. This is the very famous quotation, which means there is no universal method, fixed and stable and which definitive of what science is. Science is not defined by its method because there is no scientific method. It's maybe a family resemblance term, but it's not defined by necessary and sufficient conditions relating to the method that science uses. Well, experts often arrive at different results, but in fundamental matters and in application. Occasionally, well, there's a problem again here. So we have no unanimity in science. This is the problem. And one almost feels inclined to say, as many scientists, as many opinions. He makes the reference to what we experience with medical doctors when we have issues. There are, of course, areas in which scientists agree, yes, but this cannot raise our confidence. Unanimity is often the result of a political decision, or on other occasions, unanimity is the result of shared prejudices. So positions are taken without detailed examination of the matter under review and are infused with the same authority that proceeds from the detailed research. So appeal to experts is problematic. And this is the conclusion. Science is an essentially anarchistic enterprise. So what about the autonomy of science deriving from the scientific method as leading to truth? Problematic. And what about the success of science then? Well, I think we've already seen this quotation. The comparative excellence of science has been anything but established. Science does not excel because of its method, for there is no method. And it does not excel because of its results. We know what science does. we have not the faintest idea whether other traditions could not do much better. So we must find out. It's uncertain. Today science prevails not because of its comparative methods, as Kenneth has emphasized, but because the show has been rigged in its favor. It reigns supreme because some past successes have led to institutional measures that prevent a comeback of the rivals. So here again we see there is this pluralistic idea on the background, but it's warped in a different direction. So the success of science, let's talk about it. But then the social autonomy and authority of science is put into question. The sciences of today are business enterprises run on business principles. Research in large institutions is not guided by truth and reason, but by the most rewarding fashion, and the great minds of today increasingly turn to where money is. So this is another aspect that Kenneth emphasized, which means military matters. We could discuss about that. Well, everything is discussable, it's questionable. So, here's the problem with the tyranny of truth. What's the solution then for Feyerabend? Well, Feyerabend says every profession has an ideology and a drive for power that goes far beyond its achievements. But it is the task of a democracy to keep this ideology and this drive under control. Science is here no different from other institutions. So his idea is treating science as one of the many traditions, many institutions, many ideologies that are current in our communities. So the solution is the democratic control of science in a free society, and this comes in a few points that I would like to emphasize. The first is the separation of state and science. The separation of state and church must be complemented by the separation of state and science, that most recent, most aggressive, and most dogmatic religious institution. So we see how Feyerabend can be very thought-provoking here. There must be a formal separation between state and science, just as there is now a formal separation between state and church. Science may influence society, but only to the extent to which any political or other pressure group is permitted to influence society. The scientists may be consulted on important projects, but the final judgment must be left to democratically elected consulting bodies. So this is, well, something that Feyerabend's position is quite naive. And it might be naive, but let's discuss about it and let's see what comes out of a discussion of this position. Second, there's a proviso here. And I would like to thank Matt Brown for making in one of his recent papers this political philosophy of Feyerabend easy to understand. So I'm taking advantage of his work, trying to put things in a more perspicuous order maybe, but I want to mention him and his work. So the mature citizenship. So this separation of the state and science and this judgment of the experts by citizens, well, can be obtained only on the condition that we have a mature citizenship, another problematic concept. Oh, the separation of state and science, which is an essential part of this general separation between state and traditions, cannot be introduced by a single political act, and it should not be introduced in this way. Many people have not yet reached the maturity necessary for living in a free society. But how can we reach this kind of maturity? The maturity I'm speaking about is not an intellectual virtue. It is a sensitivity that can only be acquired by frequent contacts with different points of view. So again, pluralism, frequent contact with different points of view, dialogue. And this is also interesting. It cannot be acquired or be taught in schools. It's not a matter of education. It's a matter of participation. But it can be acquired by participating in citizens' initiatives. So only when you participate in citizen initiatives, you take the painstaking, you painstakingly take into account the positions that you want to criticize and you want to consider. Citizens' initiatives are the best and only school for free citizens we now have. So I think this could be interesting for what we are going to discuss in the afternoon. So when we have a mature citizenship or trained in this participation in citizens' initiatives, then citizens can evaluate expert opinion. Expert opinion is often prejudiced, untrustworthy, and in need of outside control. Scientists quite often don't know what they're talking about. Well, again, here is very provocative, but what he's referring to is when scientists are asked for their opinion outside the domain of their expertise. They have strong opinions, they may even know some results outside the particular field in which they are doing research, but most of the time they depend and have to depend, because of specialization, this is the problem, on gossip and rumors. And this is also an interesting point, that participation of laymen in fundamental decision is required even if it should lower the success rate of the decisions. So it's more important to have a democratic decision participated, even if it's not the best possible decision, theoretically speaking. And citizens should also supervise science, where supervision doesn't mean interference, but it means, let's see what it means. Laymen can and must supervise science. It will not only be foolish but downright irresponsible to accept the judgment of scientists and physicians without further examination. If the matter is important, either to a small group or to society as a whole, then this judgment must be subjected to the most painstaking scrutiny. And the most painstaking scrutiny is given in the citizens' initiatives when they are evaluating options. So let's come to this is the idea of free society that Feyerabend has. Let's come to the final section and see what are the underlying values of Feyerabend. A free society is a society in which all traditions have equal rights and equal access to the centers of power. A tradition receives these rights not because the importance, the cash value as it were, it has for outsiders, and this is again a crucial point, but because it gives meaning to the lives of those who participate in it. So this is the ultimate judge. What gives meaning to a life? And of a community, for example, and also of an individual. So what about his own values? What gives meaning to life according to him? He has a very down-to-earth understanding of what well-being is. I'm considering here a connection between what's a philosophical position, Feyerabend's philosophical position, and a philosophical stance. So the theoretical position one can have and the values that underlie it. Well, usually when you have a philosophical position, your underlying values are not always so visible. But when your position undergoes a crisis, then you get back to the underlying values that you have and which inspire your own thinking. So this is relevant because in the transition between theoretical pluralism and epistemological anarchism, Feyerabend distinguished what he called my skeptical phase. So I guess if we look at the skeptical phase, we can find out what are the most in-depth and underlying values that he was referring to. We find written during this skeptical phase this nice article, Science, Freedom and the Good Life, which tells what for him is the good life. What provided coherence and direction in a primitive society was an ideal. Similarly, what we should do under the present circumstances is to look for a different ideal. Once we have found a new ideal which can provide direction, then of course we will have found proper justification for procedures in every domain. So what's the ideal to which people or someone must aspire his own theoretical production. This new idea should be simply to make people more pleasant and more interesting, to make life happier, to make the world better, to make beer better, or maybe we could say tea, I don't know, and so on. Some could say very naive, in a sense, very, yeah, not particularly sophisticated. I'm not being facetious when I mention things like beer, for I think it important to cut down to size those who say we must concern ourselves with nothing less than the search for truth. For what truth is, nobody really knows. Such an ideal, therefore, does not give us the direction we need. So the direction we need is something which can be evaluated on a very material and concrete way. So we can find, for example, written during this skeptical phase, a plea for hedonism. One of the here again we have some problems in displaying the slides, but this is a section of this article, Consolation for the Specialists. So this should not be again a surprise, because Feyerabend struggled for all his life with the consequences of the war on his body and on his soul. He was working. It was constantly on painkillers. He was forced to walk with a crutch, and these were the consequences, basically, to close the circle of what happened during the war. So consequences of his being subjected to an authoritarian regime and being forced to fight in a war. So I guess that with this we can understand even better what he means when he says cutting down to earth, cutting down to size, what are our values when we come to a decision as to the option we have for conducting or taking a decision for the community. Thank you for your attention.